The interrogation that changed everything. For 15 years, I worked as a senior intelligence analyst for the Defense Intelligence Agency, specializing in North Korean affairs. I had debriefed dozens of defectors, cross-referenced thousands of reports, and built what I consider to be one of the most comprehensive understandings of the Hermit Kingdom's internal structure outside of Pyongyang itself. I prided myself on my ability to separate fact from fiction, to identify inconsistencies in testimony, and to piece together the reality behind the regime's carefully constructed facade. But nothing in my experience had prepared me for the case of Kim Sung-ho, a defector whose testimony would fundamentally challenge everything I thought I knew about North Korea and about the nature of reality itself. Kim Sung-ho crossed the DMZ on a frigid February morning in 2018, carrying nothing but the clothes on his back and a story that would soon consume my every waking moment. Unlike most defectors who were farmers, laborers, or low-level officials, Kim claimed to have been a mid-level administrator in what he called the Special Urban Development Division, a department that, according to our intelligence databases, did not exist. He was in his early 40s, with the characteristic signs of malnutrition common among North Korean refugees, but there was something different about him. His eyes held a depth of knowledge that seemed inconsistent with his claimed background, and his technical vocabulary suggested an education far beyond what most North Koreans received. When he spoke about his work, he used terms and concepts that seemed almost impossibly advanced for someone from one of the world's most isolated nations. The initial debriefing was conducted by my colleague Sarah Martinez, a Korean-American analyst who had been working North Korean cases for over a decade. Sarah was known for her ability to put defectors at ease, to create the kind of comfortable environment that encouraged honest testimony. But even she seemed unsettled by Kim's initial statements. "He keeps talking about a city called Sinju," she told me after the first session. "Not the real Sinju near the Chinese border, but something he calls the second city. He describes it as this massive underground complex that supposedly houses over 2 million people. When I press him for details about location, he just says it's between the mountains where the sun doesn't reach." I had heard enough inconsistent testimony over the years to know that defectors sometimes embellish their stories, either to make themselves seem more important or to tell interrogators what they thought we wanted to hear. But something about Kim's case intrigued me. His details were too specific, too consistent, and too technically complex to be simple fabrication. I took over Kim's case on a Tuesday morning in March. The debriefing room was a sterile, windowless space in the basement of our facility in Seoul, designed to be non-threatening, but also to minimize distractions. Kim sat across from me at a simple metal table, his hands folded in front of him, his expression calm but alert. I began with standard questions about his background, his family, his education. Kim answered these readily enough, painting a picture of a relatively privileged upbringing in Pyongyang. His father had been a mid-level party official, his mother a teacher. He had attended Kim Il-sung University, studying what he called applied social architecture, another term that didn't exist in our databases. But when I asked him about his work assignment after graduation, Kim's demeanor changed subtly. He became more cautious, more precise in his language. "I was assigned to the Special Urban Development Division in 2003, he said. "Our mandate was to plan and oversee the construction of supplementary urban centers to support the primary cities in case of enemy attack or natural disaster. And these supplementary centers," I pressed, "where are they located?" Kim was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on some point beyond my shoulder. "The first one I worked on was designated Sinju. It was underground, completely underground, built into a mountain system about 40 kilometers east of the original Sinju. I had studied satellite imagery of that region extensively. There was nothing there but mountains and forest, with no signs of major construction or industrial activity." "Can you describe the construction process? How do you build a city underground without anyone noticing?" Kim's answer was unlike anything I had heard in 15 years of debriefings. He spoke for nearly an hour, describing in meticulous detail a construction project that seemed to defy both physics and logistics. According to his account, the North Korean military had been excavating a massive underground complex since the 1970s, using techniques and technologies that he claimed were borrowed from our friends in the deep places. What made Kim's testimony particularly compelling was his technical knowledge. He described construction methods that seemed impossibly advanced: self-boring tunneling machines that could work through solid rock, atmospheric processing systems that could maintain air quality for millions of people, and hydroponic farming complexes that could feed entire populations without any external inputs. The tunneling machines, he explained, were not like anything I'd seen described in Western technical manuals. They moved through rock like it was soft earth, leaving behind walls that seemed to be fused at the molecular level. The engineers who operated them were different. They spoke Korean, but with an accent I couldn't identify. And they knew things about geology and engineering that seemed impossible. I pressed him for more details about these engineers. Kim's description was unsettling: tall, pale individuals who seemed to require very little sleep and who could work in conditions that would be dangerous for normal humans. They wore what he described as breathing apparatus, though the underground complex had perfectly breathable air. They told us they were specialists brought in from the Soviet Union, Kim said. But the Soviet Union had been gone for over a decade by the time I started working there. And their equipment, it was like nothing I had ever seen. They had machines that could cut through rock with beams of light, devices that could map underground spaces without sending anyone into them. The more Kim talked, the more I realized that either he was the most creative fabricator I had ever encountered, or he was describing something that challenged our fundamental understanding of North Korean capabilities. According to Kim's account, Seoul was a fully functioning city with residential districts, commercial areas, manufacturing facilities, and even entertainment venues. It was built on 7 levels, extending more than 300 meters below the surface. The population was a mixture of relocated citizens from border areas, technical specialists, and what Kim called permanent residents, people who had been born in the underground complex and had never seen the surface world. The permanent residents were unusual, Kim told me during our 4th session. They were adapted to the underground environment in ways that seemed almost evolutionary. They could see in very low light. They moved through the tunnels with perfect spatial awareness, and they seemed to have an intuitive understanding of the complex's systems and layout. I asked him to describe the daily life of these permanent residents. Kim's account painted a picture of a society that was simultaneously advanced and primitive, cut off from the outside world, but possessing technologies that seemed decades ahead of anything the surface world had achieved. They had food production systems that could grow anything, he said. Not just basic crops, but fruits, vegetables, even meat that was grown in vats rather than raised from animals. The taste was perfect, identical to surface-grown food, but the production methods were completely different. The energy systems were equally mysterious. Kim described fusion reactors that were compact enough to fit in a single room, but powerful enough to supply the entire complex. The reactors were maintained by the same pale engineers who had overseen the construction, and they seemed to operate on principles that Kim couldn't fully understand despite his technical background. Perhaps most intriguingly, Kim described a governing structure in Seoul that was completely different from the surface North Korean system. Rather than the familiar party hierarchy and personality cult surrounding the Kim family, the underground city was administered by what Kim called the Council of Depths, a group of 7 individuals who made all major decisions through a process he described as consensus of understanding. The council members were not Korean, Kim said. At least not entirely. They looked Korean, but there was something different about them. They seemed to know things before they were told, to understand implications and consequences that weren't immediately obvious to the rest of us. I asked him if he had ever interacted directly with council members. His response was measured and careful. Once, he said, I was called to present a report on residential district expansion. The council member who reviewed my work. When she looked at me, it was like she was seeing not just me, but everything I had ever thought or done. She asked me questions that seemed to be about my report, but her words had layers of meaning that I couldn't fully grasp. The council member had given Kim advice that seemed to transcend his immediate work assignment. She had told him to prepare for the integration, though Kim had no idea what that meant. She had also given him what he described as preparation materials, documents that seemed to contain information about surface world politics, technology, and social structures that was far more detailed and accurate than anything available to normal North Korean citizens. Kim's description of these preparation materials was particularly disturbing. According to his account, they contained detailed analyses of Western governments, accurate predictions of political developments, and technical specifications for technologies that didn't yet exist in the surface world. There were documents about something called consciousness integration protocols, Kim said. They described methods for helping surface dwellers adapt to what they called expanded awareness states. The language was technical, but the basic concept seemed to be about preparing people for contact with something. I asked him if he had brought any of these materials with him when he defected. He shook his head. The materials were printed on a special paper that dissolved if it was exposed to surface conditions for more than a few hours. But I memorized what I could. The council member told me that the information would be important for my future work. Kim's account of his future work was vague but unsettling. According to him, selected individuals from the underground complexes were being prepared for integration with surface society. They were being trained in surface customs, languages, and social structures, and then positioned in various countries around the world. I was told that I would eventually be sent to South Korea, Kim said, not as a defector, but as part of a long-term integration program. My role would be to serve as a bridge between the underground communities and the surface world, helping to prepare for a gradual revelation of the underground city's existence. One of the most compelling aspects of Kim's testimony was his description of technology transfer between the underground complexes and the surface North Korean state. According to his account, many of the advances in North Korean missile technology, nuclear capabilities, and cyber warfare had their origins in the underground cities. The surface government thought they were developing these technologies themselves, Kim explained, but the real innovation was happening in the underground complexes. The council would develop new technologies and then carefully introduce them to surface researchers in ways that made it seem like natural scientific progress. This technology transfer was apparently not limited to military applications. Kim described advanced medical treatments, agricultural techniques, and manufacturing processes that had been developed underground and then gradually introduced to surface society. The goal was to prepare the surface world for eventual integration, Kim said. The council believed that revealing the existence of the underground cities too quickly would cause panic and chaos. Instead, they were working to gradually raise the technological and social sophistication of surface society until it could handle the truth. I pressed Kim for more details about the timeline for this integration. His answer was frustratingly vague. The council spoke in terms of generations rather than years, he said. They seemed to believe that the integration process would take decades, possibly centuries. But they also spoke of acceleration protocols that could be implemented if global conditions required faster action. According to Kim's account, Sinit 2 was not the only underground complex. He described a global network of similar cities, connected by what he called deep transit systems that could transport people and materials between complexes in different countries. I was told that there were complexes under the mountains of China, Russia, and even the United States, Kim said. The council members would sometimes disappear for days or weeks, and when they returned, they would have knowledge about events and developments in other parts of the world that couldn't have been obtained through normal communications. The global network was apparently coordinated by what Kim called the Primary Council, a governing body that included representatives from all the underground complexes. This primary council was responsible for overall strategic planning and for ensuring that the integration process proceeded smoothly across different regions. The primary council was not human, Kim said during our 10th session. At least, not entirely. The council members I met in Sinu 2 were human, or close to human. But they spoke of the primary council as something else, something that existed beyond normal human understanding. The most shocking aspect of Kim's testimony came during our 12th session, when I asked him directly why he had chosen to defect if he had been selected for the integration program. Kim was quiet for a long time before answering. When he finally spoke, His voice carried a weight that I had never heard before. I began to understand what the integration really meant, he said. It wasn't just about revealing the existence of the underground cities. It was about changing humanity itself. The council was working to prepare surface humanity for contact with something that was not human. According to Kim's account, the underground cities were not just hiding from surface governments. They were serving as staging areas for what he called the arrival, the eventual open contact between humanity and another species or consciousness that had been guiding human development for millennia. The Pale Engineers, the council members, the advanced technologies, they were all part of a preparation process, Kim explained. The underground cities were being used to gradually introduce surface humanity to the reality of non-human intelligence. The integration program was designed to create a bridge between human and non-human consciousness. Kim's description of this non-human intelligence was disturbing and fascinating. According to his account, these beings had been working with select human populations for centuries, gradually guiding technological and social development in preparation for open contact. They told me that humanity was approaching a critical evolutionary threshold, Kim said. The choice was between destruction through war and environmental collapse, or transformation through integration with expanded consciousness. The underground cities were part of the transformation process. Kim's decision to defect was triggered by what he described as the invitation, a request from the council to participate in a process that would have fundamentally altered his consciousness and possibly his physical form. They called it full integration, Kim said. I would have been able to access the knowledge and capabilities of the non-human intelligence directly, but I would also have lost something essential about my humanity. I would have become something else, something that could serve as a more effective bridge between human and non-human consciousness. The invitation was apparently a great honor, offered only to individuals who had demonstrated exceptional capabilities and loyalty. But Kim had begun to have doubts about the integration process and its ultimate goals. I realized that I didn't want to lose my humanity, he said. Whatever the benefits of integration, whatever the potential for expanded consciousness, I wanted to remain who I was. So I chose to leave. Kim's escape from the underground complex was made possible by his detailed knowledge of the surface access points and security systems. He had spent months planning his route and timing, waiting for an opportunity when the Pale Engineers would be distracted by a major construction project. I knew that once I reached the surface, I would have only a few hours before they realized I was gone, Kim said. The council had ways of tracking people that went beyond normal surveillance. But I also knew that they would be reluctant to pursue me openly on the surface because it would risk exposing the underground cities. Kim's testimony presented me with an unprecedented challenge. Everything he described was either unverifiable or contradicted by our existing intelligence. There were no satellite images showing major construction in the areas he described, no signals intelligence indicating the existence of underground complexes, no other defector accounts that corroborated his story. I spent weeks trying to find some way to verify Kim's claims. I requested enhanced satellite imagery, consulted with geological experts, and reached out to contacts in other intelligence agencies. Nothing I found supported Kim's account of vast underground cities or advanced technology transfers. Yet Kim's knowledge was too detailed, too consistent, and too technically sophisticated to be simple fabrication. His descriptions of construction techniques, atmospheric processing systems, and fusion reactors showed an understanding of advanced engineering that seemed inconsistent with his claimed background. I began to consider the possibility that Kim was either a sophisticated disinformation agent or that he was describing something that existed beyond our current ability to detect and verify. As I continued to investigate Kim's claims, I began to notice patterns in other defector testimonies that I had previously dismissed as inconsistencies or fabrications. Several defectors had mentioned encountering foreign specialists in North Korea who seemed to possess unusually advanced technical knowledge. Others had described being assigned to work projects that seemed to disappear from official records. One defector from 2015 had mentioned being taken to what he called the deep place for a special work assignment. He had described it as a vast underground facility where he had worked on what seemed to be advanced manufacturing processes. His account had been dismissed as fantasy, but when I re-examined it in light of Kim's testimony, it seemed to corroborate several key details. Another defector had described encountering individuals in North Korea who seemed to know things about the outside world that should have been impossible given the country's isolation. She had mentioned being given documents that contained accurate information about Western technology and politics, but she had been unable to explain how such information could have been available. The more I looked, the more I found hints and suggestions that there might be something to Kim's story. Not proof, but patterns that seem to point toward the existence of something beyond our current understanding of North Korean capabilities. If Kim's testimony was accurate, the implications were staggering. The existence of a global network of underground cities, populated by humans and non-humans working together on a long-term integration project, would fundamentally change our understanding of human history and future development. The technology described by Kim suggested capabilities that were decades ahead of anything in the surface world. If these technologies were real, they could solve many of humanity's most pressing problems: energy production, food security, environmental degradation, and resource scarcity. But the integration process that Kim described also raised profound questions about human autonomy and the nature of consciousness itself. If non-human intelligence had been guiding human development for centuries, what did that mean for human free will and self-determination? The timeline for integration that Kim described suggested that humanity was approaching a critical decision point. The choice between destruction and transformation that he had mentioned seemed increasingly relevant as global conflicts intensified and environmental challenges mounted. I submitted my report on Kim's testimony to my superiors, along with my analysis of the patterns I had identified in other defector accounts. The response was swift and decisive. The case was classified at the highest level, and I was ordered to cease all further investigation. Kim was transferred to a secure facility where he would be held for extended debriefing. I was not told where he was being taken or who would be conducting the extended sessions. When I asked about the case, I was told that it was being handled by specialists with appropriate clearance. I was also warned that discussing Kim's testimony with anyone without proper authorization would be considered a serious breach of security. The warning was delivered in a way that made it clear that my career and possibly my freedom depended on my compliance. In the months following Kim's transfer, I found myself increasingly isolated within the intelligence community. Cases that I had previously handled were reassigned to other analysts, and I was given routine assignments that seemed designed to keep me away from any sensitive information. I began to wonder if my investigation of Kim's testimony had uncovered something that powerful interests wanted to keep hidden. The patterns I had identified in other defector accounts suggested that Kim's story might be part of a much larger phenomenon that had been systematically suppressed or ignored. I also began to notice changes in my own life that seemed too systematic to be coincidental. My security clearance was downgraded, ostensibly for routine review. My access to classified databases was restricted. My requests for information were delayed or denied. Most unsettling of all, I began to encounter people who seemed to know things about my investigation that they shouldn't have known. Colleagues would make comments that seemed to reference Kim's testimony, even though they had no official access to the case files. Strangers would approach me with questions that seemed designed to probe my knowledge of underground facilities and advanced technologies. After 18 months of increasing isolation and surveillance, I made the decision to leave the intelligence community. I submitted my resignation and began the process of transitioning to private sector work. But I also made a decision that would have profound implications for the rest of my life. I would not forget Kim's testimony, and I would continue to look for evidence that might corroborate his claims. I began to research accounts of underground facilities and advanced technologies that existed outside the classified intelligence world. I found references to deep underground military bases, advanced propulsion systems, and encounters with non-human intelligence that seemed to echo elements of Kim's testimony. I also began to connect with other former intelligence analysts who had encountered similar cases. Many of them have been marginalized or forced out of their positions after investigating phenomena that didn't fit conventional explanations. Their accounts suggested that there was a systematic effort to suppress information about advanced technologies and non-human intelligence. 3 years after leaving the intelligence community, I received an unexpected contact. A former colleague reached out to me with information that would change everything I thought I knew about Kim's case. According to my contact, Kim had not been taken to a secure facility for extended debriefing. Instead, he had been returned to North Korea through a secret exchange program. The official explanation was that he had been identified as a disinformation agent and was being sent back as part of a broader intelligence operation. But my contact had reason to believe that the real explanation was different. Kim had been returned because his testimony had been too accurate, too detailed, and too threatening to interests that wanted to control the pace and nature of integration between human and non-human consciousness. They couldn't let him continue talking, my contacts said. His information was too close to the truth. So they made a deal. He goes back quietly, and in exchange, the integration process continues according to the established timeline. The implications of this revelation were staggering. If Kim had been returned because his testimony was accurate, then everything he had described was real. The underground cities, the advanced technologies, the non-human intelligence guiding human development, all of it was part of a reality that powerful interests were working to keep hidden. The continuing investigation. Armed with this new information, I began to investigate the possibility that Kim's testimony was not just accurate, but part of a much larger phenomenon that had been systematically suppressed. I looked for evidence of underground facilities, advanced technologies, and non-human intelligence that might corroborate his claims. What I found was a pattern of suppression and misdirection that seemed to stretch across multiple governments and institutions. Reports of advanced technologies were classified or discredited. Witnesses to unusual phenomena were marginalized or silenced. Information that might point toward the existence of non-human intelligence was systematically suppressed or explained away. But I also found evidence that suggested Kim's story might be true. Geological surveys that showed unexplained underground structures, patent applications for technologies that seemed impossibly advanced, accounts from military personnel who had encountered phenomena that defied conventional explanation. The evidence was fragmentary and often contradictory, but it painted a picture of a reality that was far more complex and mysterious than the official version of events suggested. As I continued my investigation, I began to connect with other researchers who were exploring similar phenomena. I found a network of former intelligence analysts, military personnel, scientists, and journalists who had encountered evidence of advanced technologies and non-human intelligence. Many of these individuals had been marginalized or discredited for their research, but they had continued to investigate despite the personal and professional costs. Their collective work painted a picture of a reality that included underground facilities, advanced technologies, and non-human intelligence that was far more extensive than Kim's testimony had suggested. The network was informal and loosely organized, but it was united by a common goal: to uncover the truth about humanity's relationship with non-human intelligence and to prepare for the integration process that seemed to be approaching. The future. As I write this account, nearly 5 years have passed since I first interviewed Kim Sung-ho. The world has changed in ways that seem to validate many of the warnings and predictions contained in his testimony. Global conflicts have intensified, environmental challenges have mounted, and technological development has accelerated in ways that seem to point toward the critical threshold that Kim described. I continue to search for evidence that might corroborate Kim's claims, and I continue to connect with others who are investigating similar phenomena. The network of researchers has grown, and our understanding of the integration process has deepened. But I also know that time may be running out. The choice between destruction and transformation that Kim described seems increasingly urgent as global challenges mount and technological capabilities expand. The integration process that he described may be approaching a critical phase, one that will determine the future of human consciousness and development. Whether Kim's testimony was accurate or not, the questions it raised remain relevant. What is the nature of human consciousness? How should humanity respond to the possibility of contact with non-human intelligence? What does it mean to be human in an age of rapid technological and social change? These questions do not have easy answers, but they are questions that we must confront as we move forward into an uncertain future. The underground cities that Kim described may or may not exist, but the challenges they were designed to address are real and urgent. The interrogation of Kim Sung-ho may have been the most important conversation of my career, not because it provided definitive answers, but because it forced me to confront the limitations of my own understanding and the possibilities that lay beyond conventional reality. In the end, the city that Kim described may not exist in any physical sense, but the questions it raised about human potential, consciousness, and our relationship with the broader universe continue to resonate. And in a world that seems increasingly complex and mysterious, those questions may be more important than any answers we might find. The truth, as Kim suggested, may be far stranger and more wonderful than we can imagine. Our task is not to find easy answers, but to remain open to possibilities that challenge our understanding and expand our vision of what it means to be human in an infinite and mysterious universe.